The millionaire scoffed. "Translate this and my salary is yours." The maid answered and stunned him. The laughter echoed against the mahogany-panelled walls of Richard Harrington's study. The tech mogul was in his element, entertaining his fellow board members with what he considered a brilliant joke at the expense of his household staff. Elena Vasquez stood perfectly still, her face a practice mask of neutrality as she held the document he had thrust into her hands moments earlier. 20 years of service had taught her how to remain invisible in plain sight. But today, something had shifted. "I'm serious, Elena," Richard said, wiping tears of amusement from his eyes. My lawyers just sent over this contract from our new partners in Shanghai. Even our translators are struggling with the technical terminology. If you can translate this correctly by tomorrow morning, I'll give you my monthly salary. That's nearly $400,000. More laughter erupted from the three other executives seated around the imported Italian coffee table. They were celebrating the closing of a $2.8 billion acquisition, their fourth this year. To them, this was merely after-dinner entertainment. "Richard, you're terrible," chuckled Diane Winters, the CFO. "Don't tease the help." Elena glanced down at the document written entirely in Mandarin. Complex characters filled the page, with technical diagrams and annotations in the margins. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers, not from intimidation, but from a simmering emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel in this house. Indignation. 5 o'clock tomorrow, Richard continued, already turning back to his colleagues. "Although I imagine you'll be returning that promptly." He waved his hand in dismissal, the diamond cufflink catching the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. Eleanor nodded once, still clutching the document. "Will there be anything else this evening, Mr. Harrington?" "No, that's all. Make sure the bar is stocked before you leave. We'll be up late celebrating." With another nod, Elena left the study, closing the heavy oak door behind her. The sounds of laughter faded as she walked down the long corridor toward the kitchen. Her sensible shoes made no sound on the plush carpet that probably cost more than her annual salary. In the sanctuary of the kitchen, Elena placed the document on the marble countertop and stared at it. She had worked for the Harrington family since arriving in America 20 years ago. She had watched Richard's children grow up, had maintained his home with impeccable care, had even nursed his wife through the final stages of cancer 3 years ago. And still, after all this time, she remained invisible to him, a prop to be used for amusement. Elena reached for her phone in the pocket of her uniform and took a photo of the document. Then she sent a quick text message. "It's me. I need your help with something important." 40 minutes later, after ensuring the bar was stocked and the kitchen spotless, Eleanor left the Harrington estate and drove her 12-year-old Toyota to her modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood 20 miles away. Despite the late hour, lights still burned in many windows. This wasn't a neighborhood where people had the luxury of early nights. Inside her small but immaculate one-bedroom apartment, Elena changed out of her uniform and sat down at her computer. She opened her email and attached the photo of the document, then typed a brief message. "Professor Lin, I hope this message finds you well. I apologize for contacting you so late, but I have an urgent matter that requires your expertise. I would be grateful for any assistance you could provide with the attached document. With warm regards, Elena Vasquez." She hit send and then walked to a small bookshelf in the corner of her living room. From behind a row of novels, she pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, carefully organized and annotated in multiple languages. Elena turned to a blank page and began to write, her pen moving swiftly across the paper. What Richard Harrington didn't know, what none of her employers had ever bothered to learn, was that before fleeing political unrest in her home country, Elena Vasquez had been Dr. Elena Vasquez, a linguistic professor specializing in East Asian languages with a focus on business and technical translation. Elena's phone chimed at 2:17 a.m. It was Professor Lin, her former colleague from the linguistics conference circuit. Just saw your email. Fascinating document. It's a technical partnership agreement for quantum computing hardware. The terminology is highly specialized. Need help with anything specific? Happy to discuss further. Elena smiled. After fleeing her country, she had deliberately disappeared into anonymity, finding safety in being overlooked. The academic community believed she had died during the political purges. Only Professor Lin knew the truth, having recognized her at a charity event 5 years ago where she was serving drinks. He had kept her secret, understanding her need for privacy. "Thank you," she typed back. "Any technical terms I might have trouble with are appreciated. I'll handle the rest." She worked through the night, her translation skills rusty, but returning with each character she deciphered. The document was complex, outlining proprietary technology that would revolutionize data encryption. Elena noted several concerning clauses that granted the Chinese partner unrestricted access to Harrington Tech's security infrastructure, details likely buried in technical language to evade scrutiny. By dawn, she had completed a meticulous translation, along with a separate document highlighting the problematic sections. She printed both, then caught 2 hours of sleep before returning to the Harrington estate for her regular 7 a.m. shift. Throughout the morning, Eleanor performed her usual duties, preparing breakfast, tidying rooms, and starting laundry. Mr. Harrington and his guests emerged around 11, nursing hangovers with coffee she had prepared. "Elena," Richard called as she restocked the breakfast bar, "I hope you enjoyed our little joke last night. You can return those papers when you have a moment." Elena nodded. "I've completed the translation, Mr. Harrington." Richard paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I'm sorry." "The document. I've translated it as requested." She retrieved the folder from her work bag and approached the table where the executives sat in stunned silence. "That's impossible," Richard scoffed, though his smile had faltered. "You're telling me you translated a complex technical document overnight?" "Yes, sir. I also took the liberty of annotating sections that may be of concern." The room fell completely silent as Elena placed the folder on the table. Richard stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. He opened the folder and began scanning the translation, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to alarm. "This section here," Elena continued, pointing to a paragraph on the 3rd page, "grants your Chinese partners unrestricted backdoor access to all security protocols, and this clause effectively transfers ownership of any jointly developed technology to their subsidiary in Shanghai." Richard's face had drained of color. He looked up at his colleagues, who appeared equally shocked. Where did you learn?" he stammered. "I was a professor of linguistics, specializing in technical translation before circumstances required me to leave my country," Elena stated simply. "I focused on Mandarin during my postdoctoral work at Beijing University." Diane Winters, the CFO, grabbed the document. "She's right, Richard. These clauses would have gutted us. How did our legal team miss this?" "The technical terminology obscures the legal implications," Eleanor explained. "Unless one understands both the language and the technology, these clauses appear standard." Richard stood suddenly, knocking his chair backward. "Everyone out. Not you, Elena. You stay." The other executives gathered their belongings, Diane clutching the translated document protectively. When the room emptied, Richard paced for a full minute before stopping to face Elena. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years. You never asked, sir." The simple truth hung in the air between them. In 20 years, he had never once inquired about her background, her education, or her life before entering his service. "How much do they pay you?" Richard finally asked. $52,000 annually, sir, plus health insurance." Richard ran his hand through his graying hair. "Christ. And you've been handling my children's homework, organizing my library, managing my household. Yes, sir. You just saved my company from a catastrophic security breach and potentially millions in lost intellectual property, he said, his voice quieter now. Why would you help me after how I've treated you? Elena stood quietly, hands folded in front of her uniform. The question hung in the air. Why would she help him after how he'd treated her? I work here, she said finally. What happens to this company affects everyone who depends on it, including me. Richard sank into his chair, studying Elena with new eyes. 20 years, he muttered. 20 years you've worked in my home, raised my children, cared for my dying wife, all while I treated you as furniture. He winced at his own words. I don't even know where you're from. Venezuela, Elena replied. I taught at the Central University in Caracas before the regime change. When they began imprisoning academics, I escaped with only what I could carry. Richard nodded slowly. And your credentials wouldn't transfer here. My documentation was left behind. Starting over would have meant years of revalidation, expensive schooling. I needed immediate work. She paused. Your first wife hired me. She was kind. The mention of his late first wife softened Richard's expression. Margaret had better judgment than I ever did. He drummed his fingers on the table. The salary I promised. That was cruel. It was a joke, Elena said. I understood. No, it was more than that. It was a power play. To remind everyone in that room of their place and yours. He looked away, shame evident in his posture. I became exactly the type of man I swore I'd never be. Elena remained silent. This moment of self-reflection wasn't for her to interrupt. Richard stood suddenly. The deal's a deal. $400,000. Mr. Harrington, that's not necessary. It's Richard, please. And yes, it is necessary. He walked to his desk and unlocked a drawer. This isn't just about the translation. You saved my company from a catastrophic breach. Our security team will need to do a complete audit, but your work just prevented what could have been billions in damages. He returned with his checkbook. I'm writing this now before my ego finds some excuse not to. Eleanor watched as he wrote the check, her mind racing. That amount would fund her nephew's medical school education. It would help her sister's family back home. It would secure her retirement. Richard handed her the check. I'd like to offer you a different position. Our international division needs someone with your expertise. The salary is appropriate for your qualifications, with benefits to match. Elena looked at the check, then back at Richard. I've been invisible for 20 years for a reason. My family back home remains at risk. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. A private contractor position. Then, no public profile, working directly with our legal team on international agreements. We can structure it however makes you comfortable. Elena considered this. I would need certain guarantees. Name them. Anonymity, flexible hours, and, she hesitated, then continued firmly, equal treatment. No more jokes at the expense of your staff. Richard flushed but nodded. You have my word, and I understand it will take time to trust that. Eleanor folded the check carefully and placed it in her pocket. I should finish my duties for today. Of course, Richard stepped aside, then added, Elena, I'm sorry, truly. She acknowledged this with a small nod before turning to leave. 3 months later, Elena sat in a private office on the top floor of Harrington Tower. Her desk contained a state-of-the-art computer system and references in 7 languages. She had just finished reviewing a joint venture agreement with a Brazilian tech firm, identifying 3 contractual vulnerabilities that the legal team had missed. A knock came at her door, and Richard entered carrying 2 coffee cups. He set one on her desk, prepared exactly how she liked it. The Singapore deal is moving forward thanks to your revisions, he said, taking a seat. The board was impressed. Elena accepted the coffee with a small smile. She still maintained her modest apartment and kept a low profile, but her life had transformed in ways she hadn't imagined possible. "I have something for you," Richard said, placing a small package on her desk. "Open it when you have a moment." After he left, Elena unwrapped the package to find a new nameplate for her door. It read, "Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director of International Linguistics and Cultural Affairs." Beneath it was a handwritten note. "Your choice whether to use this, either way, you are seen now." Elena ran her fingers over the engraved letters of her long, unused title. 20 years of invisibility had ended with a translation and a challenge accepted. She placed the nameplate in her drawer, not quite ready for that step, but appreciating that the choice was now hers to make.